Picture this, a quiet night over northern Israel. The air is still. Then suddenly, a low mechanical hum cuts through the silence. Radar systems light up, sirens begin to scream across border towns. Families rush into shelters, soldiers snap into position, and above it all, streaks of fire tear across the sky. On one side, a highly advanced military powered by cutting-edge defense systems. On the other, a non-state actor evolving faster than anyone expected. Missiles, drones, precision strikes, closer, faster, more accurate than ever before. This is not a drill. This is not speculation. This is happening right now. Along Israel's northern border, Hezbollah's missile capabilities are not just growing, they are transforming the entire strategic balance of the region in real time. If you want to understand how we got here, what has changed on the battlefield today, and what this means for the next major war in the Middle East, you need to see the full picture. Because what you are about to hear will show you exactly why Israel's northern front is under more pressure than at any point in the last 2 decades, and what could happen next may reshape the entire region. Welcome to Crisis Reporting, your front row seat to the most critical geopolitical developments shaping our world right now, with clarity, speed, and precision. If you want to stay ahead of global conflicts, power shifts, and the decisions that could impact economies, security, and your everyday life, make sure you subscribe right now, because in moments like this, information is not just power, it is timing, and you do not want to be the last to know. Turn on notifications so you never miss a critical update, especially as this situation continues to evolve in real time. Because what is happening along Israel's northern border is not isolated. It is connected to a much larger network of strategic pressure points that are beginning to converge. Let us start with exactly what happened, and why it has triggered serious concern among military planners and intelligence agencies worldwide. Let us start with exactly what happened. Over the past several weeks, tensions along Israel's northern border with Lebanon have escalated sharply, but what changed most recently is not just the frequency of attacks, it is the capability behind them. According to reporting from Reuters and Al Jazeera, Hezbollah has significantly increased both the volume and sophistication of its missile and drone operations targeting northern Israel. On multiple occasions, Israeli defense forces confirmed launches of anti-tank guided missiles, short-range rockets, and critically, more advanced precision-guided munitions. On a single day in late reporting cycles, Israeli officials recorded more than 40 separate projectile launches from southern Lebanon into northern Israeli territory. That is not a symbolic exchange. That is sustained fire. CNN and NBC News further reported that several of these systems demonstrated improved targeting accuracy, striking military positions and surveillance infrastructure rather than random civilian areas. That detail matters because it signals intent and capability. Israeli military spokespersons confirmed that Hezbollah is no longer relying solely on legacy rocket stockpiles. Instead, it is deploying upgraded systems believed to include Iranian-backed precision guidance kits, technology designed to convert unguided rockets into far more accurate strike weapons. CENTCOM assessments and regional intelligence analysts have also pointed to an increase in coordinated drone activity. Surveillance drones, possibly armed UAVs, flying low, testing radar coverage, mapping response times. But here is where it gets more concerning. The Wall Street Journal and CBS News have both highlighted that Hezbollah's arsenal is now estimated to exceed 150,000 rockets and missiles. Let that number sink in. 150,000. Not all are precision-guided, but an increasing percentage are becoming exactly that, and that changes everything. Because Israel's defensive systems, including Iron Dome, are highly effective, but they are not infinite. They are designed to intercept incoming threats selectively, prioritizing populated areas and critical infrastructure, which means volume still matters, saturation still works. Now add precision to that equation, and suddenly Hezbollah does not need to fire thousands blindly. It can aim, it can choose, it can hit high-value targets. Israeli officials have responded with targeted airstrikes across southern Lebanon, hitting launch sites, weapons depots, and command positions. ABC News and CBS both confirmed multiple waves of retaliatory strikes, some reaching deeper than previous engagement patterns. This is no longer routine border friction. This is calibrated escalation. And both sides are signaling something very specific. Israel is demonstrating it will not tolerate expanded threat capabilities on its northern frontier. Hezbollah is demonstrating that it now possesses tools that can impose real strategic cost. But here is the key point most people are missing. This is not just about rockets being fired across a border. This is about the quiet transformation of a battlefield that has remained relatively contained since 2006 and is now beginning to shift in ways that could make the next conflict far more destructive, far more precise, and far more difficult to control. Now here is why this matters more than anyone is telling you. Here is why, because what we are witnessing is not just a border escalation, it is a structural shift in deterrence. And when deterrence shifts in a region like this, the consequences do not stay contained. Let us run the numbers slowly because this is where the severity becomes impossible to ignore. Israel's northern region is home to critical infrastructure, industrial zones, and key population centers. Cities like Haifa, a major port and economic hub, sit well within range of Hezbollah's expanding missile envelope. According to Israeli economic data and reporting from Reuters, disruptions to northern industry alone could impact billions of dollars in output within weeks. Now connect the chain. Hezbollah improves missile accuracy, high-value targets become vulnerable, infrastructure risk increases, investor confidence drops, economic activity slows, national pressure builds. That is the first domino. The second domino is military cost. Each Iron Dome interceptor costs tens of thousands of dollars. Some estimates place it between $40,000 to $80,000 per interception. Hezbollah's rockets, in many cases, far cheaper, sometimes just hundreds of dollars. Now scale that. If Hezbollah launches hundreds or thousands of projectiles in a sustained conflict, Israel faces a cost asymmetry problem. It can defend, but at a price. And over time, that price compounds. This is not just a battlefield equation. This is an economic endurance test. But here is where it gets even more serious. Precision changes psychology. In past conflicts, the threat was volume. Large numbers of unguided rockets causing disruption and fear. Now the threat is targeted damage. Power stations, air bases, communication hubs. This is not just about fear anymore. This is about functionality. And when critical systems are threatened, governments are forced into faster, more aggressive decision-making cycles. Now add the human layer. Northern Israeli communities have already experienced evacuations, school closures, and economic slowdown due to repeated alerts and strikes. Families are relocating temporarily. Businesses are pausing operations. This is where geopolitics becomes personal. This is what that means for your gas prices, your grocery bill, your savings, because instability in this region does not stay local. It ripples through global energy markets, shipping routes, and investor behavior. But let us zoom in for a moment to one person, one decision, one room, a factory owner in northern Israel, machines idle, workers sent home, orders delayed, contracts at risk. Multiply that across hundreds of businesses, and you begin to see how pressure builds internally, not just militarily. And then comes the third domino, escalation risk. Because when one side gains new capability, the other side does not just absorb it, it responds, it adapts, it escalates. Israel has already signaled, through statements reported by NBC News and CNN, that it will not allow precision-guided weapons to accumulate unchecked near its borders. That implies preemptive doctrine, which means the margin for miscalculation shrinks. One strike too deep, one misinterpreted signal, one high-casualty incident, and suddenly what was contained becomes regional. And that brings us to the most important point. Time is not on their side, because every day that passes, Hezbollah's capabilities improve incrementally. Supply lines continue, technology evolves, training deepens, and Israel knows this, which means the window to act, or not act, is narrowing. But here is where it gets more complicated than it first appears, because the story you are hearing so far is only part of the picture, and the next part, the one most coverage is not focusing on, may completely change how you understand what is actually happening. Before we go any further, if you are getting value from this breakdown, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications right now, because we are covering this story in real time as it develops, and every update could shift the entire regional balance overnight. Do not miss what comes next. Now let us talk about the dimension of this crisis that most analysts are not paying attention to, and why it could be the most important factor of all. Here is the dimension of this story that most coverage is not paying attention to, and it could be the most important factor of all, because this is not just about rockets, it is not just about Hezbollah, and it is not even just about Israel's northern border. This is about the industrialization of asymmetric warfare. This is not just about Hezbollah increasing its missile stockpile. This is about how non-state actors are now integrating state-level precision technology into their operational doctrine, and how that fundamentally changes modern conflict. This is not just about more weapons. This is about smarter weapons. What most analysts are missing is the speed of technological diffusion in the Middle East. Precision guidance kits, drone navigation systems, real-time targeting intelligence, these are no longer exclusive to major state militaries. Multiple intelligence assessments, including reporting referenced by Reuters and Western defense analysts, suggest that Iranian-linked supply chains have been central in transferring advanced missile components and guidance systems to allied groups in the region. This is not new in concept, but what is new is scale and refinement. This is not just about Hezbollah anymore. This is about a networked military ecosystem. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iranian support structures across the region, militia networks in Iraq and Syria, drone operational knowledge spreading across multiple fronts. This is about convergence. And here is why that matters. This is not just about Israel facing one northern front. It is about the possibility of multiple synchronized pressure points emerging at the same time, stretching air defense systems, intelligence capabilities, and military decision cycles. Most Western coverage still treats this as a bilateral tension between Israel and Hezbollah. But that framing is outdated. This is a multi-node pressure system, and here is where it gets more complicated, because Hezbollah's evolution is not happening in isolation. It is happening in parallel with regional learning from previous conflicts, especially the 2006 Lebanon War, the Syrian Civil War, and recent Gaza escalations. Each of these conflicts served as a live laboratory. Tactics were tested, failures were studied, systems were improved, and now, those lessons are being operationalized in real time. This is not just theory anymore. This is applied battlefield iteration. Let us bring this into focus. In previous conflicts, Hezbollah's strength was often described as quantity, large stockpiles of rockets designed to overwhelm defenses. But now we are seeing a shift toward quality, precision-guided systems that can bypass traditional defensive assumptions. And that is what changes the psychological layer of deterrence. Because when a system can no longer rely on statistical interception, when individual high-value targets become vulnerable, the entire calculus of escalation changes. This is not just military pressure. This is decision-making pressure. Now here is the deeper truth. This evolution is forcing Israel to consider not just defense, but preemption at scale. And preemption at scale carries its own risks, political, military, and regional. This is where strategic stability begins to fracture. And most global audiences are not fully processing this yet, because from a distance this looks like another flare-up in a long-running conflict. But from inside military planning rooms, this looks very different. It looks like a system approaching threshold. What most Western coverage ignores is the pacing of escalation. It is not linear. It is cumulative. Each strike, each response, each deployment builds toward a higher baseline of tension. And once that baseline crosses a certain point, de-escalation becomes significantly harder than escalation. History shows this pattern repeatedly, in multiple conflicts across multiple regions. But here is the most important twist. This is not just about military capability. This is about perceived inevitability. When both sides begin to assume that conflict is increasingly likely, their actions start to reflect that assumption, even before war officially begins. And that is where miscalculation becomes the greatest risk factor. Because in environments like this, no single actor fully controls the timeline anymore. They only control their reactions. And that brings us to the most dangerous part of this entire equation. The system is now reactive, not predictive, and reactive systems under pressure do not stabilize easily. They escalate, which brings us directly into the military reality of what this actually looks like on the ground. Now let us talk about what this actually looks like on the ground, because behind the headlines, behind the political statements, and behind the strategic warnings, there is a very real and very technical military architecture shaping this confrontation. On Israel's side, the northern defense structure is built around a layered system. At the core is the Iron Dome, designed to intercept short-range rockets and artillery shells. Above it sits David's Sling, intended for medium-range threats. And further up the chain is Arrow, designed to intercept ballistic missiles outside the atmosphere. This multi-layer system is one of the most advanced integrated air defense networks in the world, but it is not unlimited. It is designed for prioritization, not total interception. That means radar systems constantly calculate trajectory, speed, and projected impact zones, and decide in milliseconds whether a projectile is a threat worth engaging. Now shift to Hezbollah. What was once a relatively simple rocket force has evolved into a hybrid arsenal. According to multiple defense assessments and reporting from Reuters and Western intelligence briefings, Hezbollah's inventory now includes short-range rockets, medium-range ballistic systems, anti-tank guided missiles, and unmanned aerial systems. And most importantly, precision guidance upgrades are increasingly present. These systems are believed to be derived from Iranian technological assistance, allowing previously unguided rockets to be converted into semi-precision weapons. That changes the geometry of war, because now, instead of firing dozens of rockets to randomly saturate an area, smaller numbers can be directed toward specific infrastructure targets, military bases, radar installations, logistics hubs. On the ground, this creates a different kind of pressure. Israeli Northern Command units operate in constant readiness posture. Reserve mobilization systems are partially activated. Air defense batteries are repositioned dynamically depending on threat assessment cycles. Meanwhile, Israeli Air Force operations conduct near-continuous surveillance and preemptive targeting missions across southern Lebanon, striking launch sites, storage facilities, and command nodes. These are not symbolic strikes. These are attempts to degrade capability before it is used. But here is the challenge. Hezbollah's operational doctrine is built around dispersion and concealment. Launch units are often mobile. Storage sites are hidden in civilian terrain. Command structures are decentralized. That creates an asymmetric battlefield environment. Conventional air superiority does not guarantee complete suppression. And this is where escalation risk becomes embedded in the system itself, because each side is operating under time pressure. Israel is attempting to prevent capability buildup. Hezbollah is attempting to preserve and improve survivability while maintaining deterrent pressure. Now introduce drones into this equation. Unmanned aerial vehicles, some for reconnaissance, some potentially armed, reduce reaction time even further. They test radar coverage. They probe defensive blind spots. They force constant readiness cycles. And readiness cycles are not free. They exhaust personnel. They strain logistics. They increase the probability of error. Now imagine a worst-case scenario. A coordinated multi-vector attack, rockets from multiple directions, drone incursions at low altitude, anti-tank missile strikes on border positions, and indirect fire toward civilian infrastructure. Even if intercepted at high rates, the psychological and operational strain would be immediate, and that is what keeps strategists awake at night. Not just the weapons themselves, but the coordination potential, because coordination turns capability into strategy, and strategy turns incidents into campaigns. At that point, the conflict is no longer about isolated exchanges. It becomes sustained military engagement. But here is the critical constraint. Neither side fully benefits from uncontrolled escalation, which means deterrence is still active, but increasingly fragile. And fragile deterrence is one miscalculation away from collapse. Which brings us to the wider geopolitical dimension, because this is not happening in isolation. There are larger powers watching, calculating, and adjusting their own positions in real time. Let us pull the camera back because there is a second layer of this crisis that is often discussed in diplomatic circles, but rarely explained clearly in public analysis. And it may ultimately shape the limits of escalation more than the battlefield itself, because this is not just a regional confrontation anymore. It sits inside a much larger global system of power competition. And in that system, China, Russia, and broader multipolar diplomacy all have indirect stakes. Let us start with China. China's primary concern in the Middle East is stability, not alignment. Beijing depends heavily on predictable energy flows from the Gulf and surrounding regions. Even minor disruptions in the wider Middle East security environment can influence global oil benchmarks like Brent crude, which in turn affects China's industrial cost structure. Here is the number that changes everything. Roughly 50–60% of China's crude oil imports transit through maritime routes connected to Middle Eastern supply stability, either directly or indirectly via global pricing systems. So when tensions rise between Israel and Hezbollah, especially with risk of escalation involving Iran-linked networks, China's exposure is not military, it is economic. Now here is the contradiction. China does not want escalation, but it also benefits diplomatically from presenting itself as a stabilizing alternative to Western-led crisis management. That means Beijing often supports de-escalation rhetorically, while maintaining strategic flexibility in its broader Middle East relationships. This creates a quiet tension. Stability is the goal, but influence is also the opportunity. Now shift to Russia. Russia's position is different. Moscow maintains historical and strategic ties with multiple regional actors, including Syria and indirect channels of communication across various militia-linked networks. For Russia, Middle Eastern instability can serve as a distraction for Western attention and resources, but it is a double-edged advantage, because large-scale escalation would also risk broader global economic instability, especially in energy markets where Russia itself is a major exporter. So Russia benefits from pressure, but not breakdown. Now zoom out further. What emerges is not a simple alliance structure, but a pressure balancing system. Each major external actor wants influence over outcomes, but none want uncontrolled war, and that creates an invisible constraint layer over the conflict. But here is the deeper issue. None of these external actors directly control the tempo on the ground. That remains in the hands of regional military decisions, intelligence assessments, and real-time battlefield dynamics, which means global powers are reacting, not directing, and that is important. Because when global powers are reactive, not controlling, local miscalculations become globally significant events. Now bring it back to the core conflict. Israel and Hezbollah are not operating in a vacuum. Their decisions are filtered through global economic sensitivity, diplomatic pressure channels, and indirect strategic signaling from multiple capitals. But none of that removes the immediate risk. In fact, it can amplify it. Because when multiple external actors attempt to discourage escalation, while local actors feel increasing pressure to act decisively for deterrence purposes, the system becomes more compressed. And compressed systems are less forgiving. This is the paradox. Everyone wants stability, but the structure of incentives creates instability risk. And that brings us to the final question: what happens next when pressure reaches its peak? This is where all the threads converge, because at this stage the situation is no longer defined by isolated incidents. It is defined by momentum, and momentum always forces outcomes. There are two primary scenarios emerging from the current trajectory. Scenario A, escalation path. In this scenario, continued precision strikes and expanded missile activity eventually trigger a high-impact incident. This could be a successful strike on a high-value military site or significant damage to civilian infrastructure in northern Israel. Once that threshold is crossed, Israel is likely to respond with a far more intensive military campaign targeting Hezbollah's command structure, logistics networks, and missile infrastructure across southern Lebanon. This would not be limited retaliation, it would be systemic degradation operations. Air campaigns would expand, ground forces could be mobilized near the border, and regional actors would come under immediate pressure to avoid spillover. Hezbollah, in turn, would likely escalate its rocket and drone operations in response, potentially widening the geographic range of attacks deeper into Israeli territory. At that point, containment becomes extremely difficult. Scenario B, controlled pressure, negotiation path. In this scenario, both sides continue calibrated exchanges without crossing a major triggering threshold. Israel maintains targeted strikes aimed at degrading capabilities without provoking full-scale war. Hezbollah maintains deterrent pressure through limited but persistent missile and drone activity. Behind the scenes, diplomatic channels, likely involving regional intermediaries, work to establish informal understandings to limit operational scope. This is not peace, this is managed confrontation, but it is fragile, because it depends entirely on restraint holding under continuous stress, and restraint under pressure is not guaranteed. Now here is the critical factor that overrides both scenarios: time. The longer this situation continues at elevated intensity, the more likely it becomes that a miscalculation occurs, not necessarily a strategic decision, but a tactical error, a misidentified target, a timing overlap, a response delay. And in systems like this, small errors scale quickly. So the real question is not just which scenario unfolds, it is when the tipping point is reached. The next 72 hours will be decisive. Will escalation cross a threshold that forces broader regional response? Will diplomatic pressure succeed in slowing operational tempo? Will either side attempt to reset deterrence through a major strike? These questions are not theoretical anymore. They are operational, and they are active right now. Let us bring all of these threads together. What is unfolding along Israel's northern border is not a sudden crisis. It is the result of a long, gradual evolution in capabilities, strategy, and deterrence logic. Hezbollah has expanded its missile arsenal and introduced greater precision into its strike capability, shifting the balance from quantity-based pressure to targeted operational threat. Israel, meanwhile, maintains one of the most advanced multi-layer air defense systems in the world, but even that system is being tested by sustained adaptive pressure. Economically and strategically, the stakes are rising. Northern Israel's infrastructure, population centers, and industrial capacity sit within an increasingly active threat envelope. Each exchange adds cost, tension, and operational strain on both sides. What makes this moment different is not just escalation, but transformation. The battlefield is becoming faster, more precise, and more interconnected with regional and global dynamics. And behind it all, external powers are watching closely, trying to manage instability without directly controlling it. This is no longer a question of isolated border incidents. The question is whether deterrence can hold long enough for diplomacy and restraint to stabilize a system that is already under continuous pressure. Because once that balance breaks, it is not easily restored. That is what we do here at Crisis Reporting. We break down complex geopolitical events into clear, structured analysis so you can understand not just what is happening, but why it matters and where it is heading next. If you found this breakdown valuable, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Because stories like this do not develop on a schedule, they evolve in real time, and the next update could shift the entire picture. And if you know someone who follows global affairs, defense news, or Middle East developments, share this with them. Understanding these shifts early matters more than ever. This is World Crisis Reporting. Stay informed, stay ahead.